kind of important for me, and it's the only one I've kept for myself. And inside of this head shape are all these other head shapes that are collected from about 10 years of work. So there's a little rapid prototype of the front part of a head that I made in 2002. That was sitting in a box for years, and when I started making these things, basically what I was doing was just building new sculptures out of old things. So it's just the idea.
I hear you. You had a barn full of stuff.
Initially, it was in my studio, and it was just completely filled up to the point where I couldn't even work, and it became unworkable.
Have you heard of that reality show, Hoarders?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's somebody turned me on to Hoarders a couple of years ago, and
if they were only artists,
it's changed my thinking about a lot of things. I mean, I think for sure we all have an impulse to hoard and collect things, and then it becomes pathological for some people. But I think for artists, sculptors, certain sculptors, really sculptors in general, are all hoarders. And everyone that I've met is a hoarder on some level. They can be really hyper-organized hoarder, but they're still hoarders. And so, yeah, I started really examining a lot of things at a certain point when I started making these pieces. And one of them was this idea of this amount of stuff that I had accumulated and what it was doing to my life. And so there was the one aspect of these works was this idea of getting rid of this stuff or reusing this stuff, or this cast-off side or this residue. A lot of it's just kind of things that people outgrew, or just got disused or stopped being important or whatever.
Why did you find it important?
I like the idea of basically each object brings with it its own personal story and its own history, whether it's mine or someone in my family's or complete strangers or what have you. I became interested in kind of, what are those stories, or what are those, what are the meanings embedded in these objects and the histories of these objects, and when you put them together, force them into a situation together, what do they say to one another? And then also when you give them this sort of armature of a form, what do they then, what's the relationship of all of these things, or individually these things, to the form? So all of those things were interesting to me, and it became, this way of organizing this stuff. At the same time as it became a way of actually dealing with all of this stuff. So I started just literally dumping it all back into these molds, and then filling the molds up with this archival resin. So everything that's inside of these things, it's completely solid. They're all solid. They're not like a container that's just kind of things inside of it. It's completely solid. So every space that's not occupied by a form or a thing inside these sculptures is occupied by this resin. So they're very dense, and there's also, of course, all this material that's embedded on the inside that you can't even see, that brings with it, all of its own, all of those, stories and histories and meanings. And so it's kind of, there's this force that's generated by a lot of the things that you can only partially see or that are invisible but are still in there. And so then this whole notion of, it's kind of like sometimes when I start making things, I'll just begin to make them for a certain set of reasons, and then as I'm making them, other things will reveal themselves to me. And that's been really very much the case with these. And I hadn't really thought too much about the metaphor of the head. Too much.
It's a self-portrait as well.
Well, no, I mean, just the whole idea of the head as a vessel. So through the history of, thousands of years of different cultures around the world, you have this recurring theme, the head being used as everything from funerary vessel to reliquary to some kind of an urn to time capsule to a vase or a glass or a jar or a shot glass or a pickle container or a ceramic form, whatever. It's just kind of endless the more you look into it. But I became interested specifically in the use in certain cultures, particularly the Bura culture, which was about a 7,000-year-old African tribe, and they have these funerary vessels, which are in the shape of a head, except they're really basically completely abstract. They're about as abstract as you can get, while still having an element of the physiognomy of the human head. So there's just kind of this blob shape with maybe the slightest indication of like a mouth. But when they passed away, they would put the person's important belongings and trinkets and bits of their bones and teeth into these head vases, head vessels, and then turn them upside down and bury them in the ground. So I became interested in those, and I'm collecting those. I've collected a couple of those now, and I'm making some new things that are based on those forms. But you know, but there are so many other associations as well that I've become interested in. You know, all the way up to these very kind of you know, contemporary incarnations of this idea of head and vessel. So I've been collecting these things on eBay. But anyway, so I began to make these things by just kind of throwing things in and trying to think about them, or not think about them compositionally, and just have them arrange themselves. And then as I made more of them, that became something that was really unavoidable. But I am working, basically when I'm doing these things, I'm putting stuff into the mold, so I'm working by reaching into the mold and placing things into the mold, so I'm working upside down. The head mold is turned upside down, things being filled in from here. And then I'm working inside out too. So every single time I demold a piece, there's this element of not knowing exactly really what's going to be there, even if I have gotten quite good at kind of controlling it, which I love. I love this idea of like unwrapping this thing and being surprised by it, because it brings in this element of chance in a way that I really enjoy. You know, so that's been important. And then they've all really changed. I mean, each one is completely different from the other. I think of them as unique forms. And this one again filled up with all these different heads. My head, other people's heads. I started collecting life masks on the internet. It seems really strange to me that somebody's physical likeness is just floating around out there on the web. It can be purchased for $20. When they make films, and they'll bring the actor in and they'll do a life mask, so they don't have to go back every single time and get the person to come and sit every time they do a makeup adjustment or a special effect adjustment or what have you. So that these life masks are there at the studios, and then they get somehow distributed out into the world and cast again, and edition upon edition upon edition gets made, and then they're just floating around out there. So Leonard Nimoy is in here somewhere. Outside Angelina Jolie and Beethoven, which is completely arbitrary. They just happen to be the faces that I collected about 10 of them, and I've used them in these things. And then you've got this is a recent life mask that I made of myself. That cast me from a life mask, and that's going to be the basis of the new sculpture I'm working on, several new sculptures I'm working on now. This is a really big wrapped prototype head that I made of my wife early on, many years ago, and that was just sitting in a box forever. So even these types of things, when I make a lot of these pieces where I'm using prototyping and stuff, a lot of those prototypes don't end up being the final artwork. They get turned into, you know, I make molds from them, and then I make castings from those. And so that stuff just sort of been piling up, and now I've been finding a way to reincorporate that. Again, they have a great quality to them, and there's just this whole history built up in those forms.
So I guess you have a lot less stuff in your studio now?
Yeah, the problem is now that I have nothing. I've used it all completely. I've used
Some people wouldn't see that as a problem.
No, I mean, it has been this amazing cleansing exercise, and I have very little extraneous crap around me these days, which is really nice. It's been great to be able to put things into these pieces and have them make sense and work as an artwork that then can go out into the world and just have its own life, but it's not sitting in my house or my studio or whatever anymore.
Well, now you can start all over again.
Yeah, the problem is now I'm collecting things. I'm trying to find things, and it's a lot harder to actually go out and collect stuff to put into works. You know, because then the decisions become different. And, I'm becoming much more particular about what I want to put into them and so forth.
Why do you think that is?
Just because I think that it's only natural, the sort of evolution of making things. You become a little more self-critical of what you're doing, and you're examining it a little bit more. And so as you're going along, you're kind of thinking more about why you're doing what you're doing. Because the why is really the most important thing. So.
That's pretty good.
But so that's, I guess that's that everybody has in shoeboxes. Have become kind of like relics in a way, because people are selling them and buying them on eBay.
And then there's things like Histomatic.
I mean, this whole idea of like, before photography, there was, if you wanted to remember somebody, the tool for memorializing somebody would be to sculpt a portrait bust or to make a life mask or a death mask. That was it. And then with photography, this is really cross-cultural all around the world. And I, the show at the Met recently of the Heroic African show, the African portraiture, revealed this as well in that culture, which is that when photography arrived, this tradition stopped. This idea of sculpting somebody, memorializing somebody through a sculpture bust or likeness stopped. And now what we have is that this photography is phasing completely out into into digital. So it's another major seismic kind of change in how we remember and how we memorialize through, capturing a person's essence or a person's character. And that's really what art's about, is this idea of like flirting with, death, with memorializing somebody or some living thing through a static, dead object. And so the idea of the fact that, these are based on a digital scan, the form is the traditional bust, so that's like jumping over the photographic, middle space of memory. But now what I'm doing mostly is like filling them up with old photographs, so mine and other people's. So the sort of idea, once again, of like collective memory versus individual memory, and how there is very much this connection between, everybody's memories.
And you're also preserving these. They're almost like little time capsules.
Very much so. They're totally